Hello you lovely lot. In this week's video we're going to be discussing, is the Canon R5 the best all-round camera for interiors and architecture photography in 2022? We're going to be discussing that and more in this video shot in this disused church in Turkey. Let's do it. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is James Kerwin and this is me. I'm an architecture and interior photographer from the UK and I love shooting abandoned places, relics, ruins, hidden gems and ghost towns, as well as off the beaten path locations all around the world. I'm posting new videos every Sunday, so why don't you join me for the ride by subscribing. You can also check out my website in the description below. Come to realise that the Canon R5 probably is the best camera at this point for interiors and architecture shooting. I've had it for around about 18 months and to be honest with you, I'm not one for like talking and bigging up a camera when I first purchase it. I need to be using it, I need to get to grips with it, and now I think 18 months is a solid use case scenario that I can talk about it here on this channel and across social media. So yes, at this point I believe it is the best bang for buck in 2022 for this kind of work. Commercial, personal, fine art photography, whatever it is you do. For architecture work, I believe it's the best Canon, certainly the best Canon, but maybe even the best camera on the entire market. Okay, so I did have some challenges when I first picked up this camera and started using it, not particularly with the actual use case. Video took a little bit of getting used to, and if you're trying to run and gun some video, then getting the settings locked down before you're shooting was always like something that I was having to bear in mind. I was having to try and dial something in, remember where it was in the menu, completely different for a video's settings point of view. But in terms of photography, it's very familiar. As you're going to hear through the next kind of points that I'm listing, pretty much for photography, this camera is familiar, has that familiar feeling. And that's the thing, you can get started with it straight away. The thing that I did find a challenge though, was the raw files were a little bit different than what comes out of the old camera I had, which was the Canon 5 DSR. And I've talked about that camera before, even just a couple of years ago on this channel, and you can see that video linked just up here. Okay, so number one is the flip out screen, the touch screen. It's a flip out and it's a touch screen. It's pretty decent. Basically, it's really cool for architecture photography because not only is it, angles out, you can flip it out, you can also get you out some really tricky situations. It's large, it's clear, it's a really beautiful display on the back of it. Of course, it's got the same setup in terms of many other cameras on the market, so this isn't unique, but in Canon cameras, large format ones in particular, like the 5 DSR, there wasn't of course a flip out screen option on that camera. So being able to upgrade to the R5 and then get this flip out screen was a real boost to me and my toolkit. Like I said, this screen can really get you out of tricky situations. Say you're hard pressed against the wall, you can flip it out, you can be able to angle it and then be able to get right pressed against the wall to shoot in a tight space. Of course, as well, the obvious one is ceilings. As you'll see in previous clips overlaid, I've had to lie on the floor before to get some photography, and with this camera, you don't have to do that. You can actually be balanced at a higher position, and then you can actually just flip out the screen and use it to shoot ceilings and look upwards with your camera. So 95% of the time when I'm using this camera for shooting architecture, interior or exterior, I'm going to be using live view rather than the viewfinder. And that means that this is used quite a lot. This flip out screen gives me lots of benefits, and I'd say I'm used and accustomed to shooting in live view 95% of the time. In fact, even when I'm shooting other genres now, I tend to pop the camera on a tripod and shoot using the live view over looking through the eye cup. Also looking through that viewfinder as you get older and your eyesight starts to go, it's definitely better with the LCD and going live view. And in architecture, we do that all the time. The next one for me has got to be file size. Now, one of the disadvantages of the old Canon 5 DSR that I had is it was incredibly high detail. Like it had a huge megapixel count, over 50 megapixels. It was very, very kind of like prone to picking up vibrations. So say for example, a colleague is walking through this church here on these floorboards, or another photographer or the landowner, whatever it is, and I was photographing, even just slight vibrations, then raw files would be ruined and I'd have to start all over again. It's a completely different sensor and file size in the R5, and it's not quite as prone to those little small vibrations being picked up. That means that you can get away with more and still get beautiful RAW files to work with in post. The next pro of this camera has got to be the silent shooting mode. Now, of course, that appears in loads of cameras, but even in the 5DSR, when I'm comparing it back to that previous camera, the silent mode wasn't completely silent in the 5DSR. In this, being a mirrorless camera, the R5 is a lot more silent. And if you're sneaking into a location, such as a church here in Turkey, or you're doing a commercial job where you don't want to make noise around employees of that company, then this silent mode is definitely for you when shooting interiors. It's near on virtually silent, meaning that you aren't going to make loads of noise around them employees when you're shooting that commercial gig. Okay, the dynamic range of this camera, the R5, is definitely a huge advantage over my previous camera, the 5DSR, but also other cameras for this genre of photography. And the reason why is because the dynamic range in this camera, you can lift the shadows in post-processing a great deal. You can really recover the files. Let me give you an example. Say we're on location, the sun's setting, we're shooting an external of this church, the church we're in now. The sun's dropping in the sky, we need to boost the ISO right up, and let's say we need to go to 3200. With my 5DSR, I could never really do that. I start to get less and less usable files. With this camera, no problem. It can produce amazing results, even at huge ISO numbers. Reduce the noise, increase the shadows, the dynamic range is brilliant. Okay, these days with the increased need to do different types of social media, especially for clients in the commercial world, video is an absolute no-brainer. If you can pick up a body that doubles up as both video and a stills camera, then you're going to be in a great place, especially in the commercial architecture and interiors world. But even for me doing personal and fine art photography, this is essential. Instagram Reels, client walkthrough videos, or maybe even 4K videos for YouTube, it's all possible with this R5. When you're working in this genre, it then doubles up as a great camera to be able to do both stills and video. It's essential. And recent firmware updates enabled this camera to be able to do great results when using a wide angle or mounting a wide angle to the front of it as well. In the past, when it first came out, there was a lot of wide angle wobble issues. These days, with the latest firmware update, make sure you've updated to the latest firmware, of course. These are eliminated pretty much somewhat. It's definitely a huge improvement. I'm using the Canon EF to EOS R adapter that essentially then, when you use it, adds that mirror back on to the mirrorless camera in terms of size and weight. So many of us have those old lenses of Canons. I think I have a couple in my bag just down there, even just portrait lenses as well. And this enables you to sort of like tap into that back catalogue. It keeps your expenses lower when you're first starting out and trying to get started, especially if you're new into architecture or interior photography. Yeah, pick yourself up one of these. I use it to take advantage of the Canon 17 and 24mm tilt shift lenses, and you can use it to do exactly the same with old wide angles or anything else that you have. It works perfectly, seamlessly, and actually gets no difference in terms of results. I don't use any filters with this one, it's just simply an add-on and it's just a see-through adapter. You can pick them up fairly cheap now. At one point they were on back order quite a bit, but I actually recommend getting one of these to take advantage of that, like I said, that back catalogue of lenses that Canon have available for this genre of photography. It's basically an amazing back catalogue of lenses. So the final point is the familiar buttons and dials. Maybe not quite, this isn't quite the case if you're, say, migrating over from a completely different system, but I think even people that have come from those different systems would have seen those old traditional Canon cameras, say the 600Ds of this world back in the day. The R5 has a very similar, and Canon's famous actually for its menu system. It's simple, it's easy to use, it's easy to find things, and this familiar feeling, especially for photography side of using this camera, is absolutely perfect. You can get great results straight away. You can pick it up, start using it, look for things, find them on the menu system, and that's one great point about this camera. It's a familiar feeling, even if you're coming from a different camera system and you recognize those old menus, those old Canon menus of the past. The buttons, the dials, and the menu are pretty much a carbon copy of the old DSLRs, the old famous Canon 5D Mark II. It's a similar look and feel in terms of where everything's positioned. So the Canon R5 has this amazing menu, and the familiar feeling of that menu is basically a great plus with this camera, of course, with the added features in video and other things that 2022 brings with it. So yeah, that's the final point, and one that I hope brings this camera together and really means that I can finally recommend it 18 months on for this style of work. One other thing to mention is the prints that come out of this camera. I haven't actually printed with it until fairly recently, actually just earlier this summer. I'm standing here in October 2022. So earlier this summer I printed with it for the first time, and I can now recommend that the prints come out of it beautifully, as of course they should do in 2022. But my style applied to it and my editing style, printing those out with luminosity mask type files, this actually made great results. The dynamic range, a little bit of noise just where you want it, nice and sharp, combined with the right lenses, prints beautifully, this camera. Okay, so I believe then that this camera is the best for architecture photography in 2022 with those options that I've mentioned, the flip out screen, the dynamic range, and of course that back catalogue of lenses that Canon have. A great option, whether you're starting out in this genre, whether you're breaking into this genre for the first time, or whether you're a seasoned pro shooting high-end commercial work. This is definitely a camera to consider, and I can definitely recommend it, of course, 18 months on. It's been out now for, what, 2.5 years. But with all the recent updates and firmware updates that it's had, it's a brilliant option, especially if you're a full-time professional photographer. Okay, for people that are new around here, maybe you should hit subscribe, hit the bell notification, you'll be alerted next time I upload a video. I'm always doing videos like on location, in the studio as well. I try and do tips and tricks in interiors, architecture, urbex style photography, off the beaten path locations. Maybe you'll enjoy it. I'd love to see you around. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a like. Please write a comment below. I'll be sure to come back to you. Subscribe, hit the bell notification. You'll be alerted when I upload a video next Sunday. Until then, have a great rest of your weekend and bye-bye for now. Take care, guys.